Yeah, you saw the title of my video, and I'm just gonna be honest here, I don't think Dimension Shifter is a huge problem that people make it out to be. Yes, I do agree that the card is annoying at times, however, I don't see the TCG banning or limiting him at the time of recording this video. They might semi-limit Shifter, but I don't think they'll do that either. Basically in this video, I'm going over 3 points on why I think Shifter is not the problem. Now, let me make a disclaimer, this is my opinion, so I could be wrong here, but the way I see things, there's a bigger problem than Shifter, so I'll be explaining that in the video. So let's get started, shall we? Alright, starting off with point number 1, Dimension Shifter's entire purpose. You know, it's rare in Yu-Gi-Oh! History for Konami to tell us why they made a card. There are only a few cases where they told us what a card's purpose is, and the TCG did give us a reason as to why they created Shifter in the first place. If you go on the Yu-Gi-Oh! Website and look at the 2019 Megaton, in the description, you can see them talking about 3 world premiere cards designed to counter fast-paced combo decks, and one of those descriptions talks about punishing your opponent for graveyard dumping. This is clearly talking about D-Shifter, and I'll be honest here, their logic kind of makes sense. Why, you ask? Well, I feel like I can make an argument that graveyard-based combo decks are the strongest types of combo decks in the game, as they're using the graveyard as a second hand. Getting cards into the graveyard has always been an easy task since DM with Painful Choice, and we have had a lot of powerful graveyard effects over the years since the GX era with things like Malicious, Level Eater, and much more. Furthermore, some have floating abilities which makes your common board breakers risky to use as you don't want your opponent to gain any advantage back, so if you don't kill them this turn, they can just rebuild their board on their next turn. Some notable graveyard-based combo decks are Shaddolls, Burning Abyss, Grass decks, Phantom Knights, and most famously, Tearlament. This brings me to a question I have for all of you. How are you supposed to beat Tear without playing the mirror match and surviving going second? Bestials, you say? That is true, but they didn't work all the time since all the cards in Tear were at 3. Shifter was one of, if not the best possible chance you had to beat that deck. Now, I know some people are going to comment like this and say that Tear is dead so it doesn't matter anymore. However, I have another question. Do you really think Konami's going to stop printing graveyard-based decks? They just made Memento, which I know isn't too good, but my point is that these types of decks aren't going away. Konami will still print them even after Tearlament. In fact, Tear kind of shows why D-Shifter is necessary, so you can have some sort of comeback against these types of decks, and without Shifter, the format could be a lot worse. Basically, to put this point in short, D-Shifter is a necessary evil to give players a chance against graveyard-based combo decks. Before I move to my next point, one argument I bet people will say is that Maxi was specifically designed to counter combo decks like X-Saber and Six Samurai, according to Kevin Teward, which are similar to the combo decks we have today, and that card still got banned. So what's the difference between it and Shifter? Well, to that, here's my answer. Point number 2, Dimension Shifter's downsides. I'm not making this up, but people think that D-Shifter is just as poorly designed as Max C, and I just can't agree with that comparison. Max C is way more unbalanced than D-Shifter. I'll admit, their lingering effects are powerful, but there's much more to what makes Max C more broken compared to Shifter. Some notable ones are that you can use Max C whenever you want, and draw as many times as your opponent's special summons without any sort of downside. Other than counters which don't always justify a card to stay in the meta, Max C itself has no downsides to it, but Shifter on the other hand does. The biggest one is that you can't use the card whenever you want, unlike Max C. There will be games where people will draw Shifter after turn 1 and it will be a dead card because now you got stuff in your graveyard. Some other downside Shifter has is that you're under his effect as well, so it won't be a one-side macrocosmos. Before I bring up another one, people will say something like Gamma had a lot of downsides to it, and that card still got hit, which is true, but one thing Gamma has that D-Shifter doesn't is that you can summon Gamma during your turn, which can lead to Synchro and Link plays, most notably the Excel Stardust play. Same thing can be said with the Ghost Sisters sometimes, but with D-Shifter, you can't really summon the card because they made it a level 6 on purpose. This is to avoid this card being abused in any other needs. So despite what people think, D-Shifter does have downsides to it. I do believe that Konami R&D thought carefully to avoid another Max C situation, where the card is overwhelmingly busted leading it to possibly being banned. However, one argument I know people will say is that turn 1 matters so much in Yu-Gi-Oh! And D-Shifter can win games on its own, so why do these downsides matter? The reason why they matter has to do with my final point, and that's point number 3. Shifter is not the problem, it's the format. To understand this point, we gotta look at another hand trap that people have wanted to ban, Droll and Lockbird. People have argued that Droll is ban-worthy for the same reason as Shifter, being that their lingering effects are too oppressive. Though Simo, Teammate BS, and Joshua Smith have all argued that it's not Droll's fault, but the format he is in, as you have a lot of combo decks that dominate the meta. However, their biggest weakness is that they rely on searching, which is why Droll is needed to counter them. And I can agree with this, as formats where Droll was used were kind of toxic. Some examples are Tier 0 Spiral, Drytron, and most recently Super Heavy Samurai. You're probably wondering where I'm going with this, but I believe that the same logic can be applied to Dimension Shifter in his own right. Basically, I feel like Shifter is only relevant depending on the format he is in, and this can be decided in 2 ways. The first way correlates with my first point. If there's a graveyard-based combo deck running around the meta, people will use Shifter to counter it. As for the second way, it correlates with my second point, by having decks that can either play around Shifter or specialize in banishing. The reason why Shifter's downsides matter is that not every deck can use it, mainly because your own cards get banished too, and a lot of decks can't afford that, leading to only a select few that can take advantage of it. Some examples include Exo Sisters, Vanquished Soul, and Guru Control. However, one question I have is this: would these decks ruin the meta just because they can play Shifter? I believe the answer is no. While I do see these decks getting top cuts on high competitive levels from time to time, I don't believe they'll take over the meta just because they can play Shifter. Plus, they can't really search Shifter, and they rely heavily on the grind game to beat you, so you don't have to worry about them killing you after they shifted you. Again, these decks are good, but they can't really take over the meta, and Shifter being at 3 won't help them do that. However, there are decks that have seen competitive success and who have always main decked 3 Shifters. Those decks being Kashtira and Floowandereeze. I will admit, these decks being able to use Shifter to their advantage is nuts, though I have another question for all of you. Is D-Shifter the main reason why these 2 decks were so dominant? If you think the answer is yes, well, I disagree, and I can prove it. Look at Floowandereeze. Are they still a meta deck? No. Ever since the Wind Barrier strategy got banned, they haven't really done much in the meta. Sure, it might have gone a top here and there, but regardless, Shifter at 3 isn't the main source as to why that archetype was a meta deck. It did play a part because they could use it multiple turns, but it wasn't the main reason why they were so dominant in the meta. Now, moving on to the biggest offender, Kashtira. Again, I gotta ask, is Shifter the main reason why this deck became the best deck of the format, or at least right now the most threatening deck? Again, no it's not. The main reason is because these 2 cards, Arise Heart and number 89 Diabolos, are what made Kashtira the best deck in the game. First, you have Diabolos, who can banish multiple cards from your opponent's deck, as well as take Shangri-La's zone locking ability to disgusting levels. And then there's Arise Heart, who has the power to gatekeep an entire format, as you have to put in cards like Book of Moon to beat him. Basically, if your deck can't beat Arise Heart, then you have no chance of beating Kashtira in this format. These 2 Xyz monsters are what made Kashtira so frustrating to fight against, and while Shifter does play a part, like he did in Floowandereeze, he's not the main reason as to why Kashtira is the best deck in the game. I can probably make a bet that even if Shifter didn't exist, Kashtira would still be the best deck regardless, mainly because of these 2 Xyz monsters. To wrap this video up, the point I'm trying to make here is that Shifter was never the main problem. Yes, he can be frustrating, but at the same time, he can really be a format dependent card. And the real bigger problem is just how Yu-Gi-Oh! Is now. I said in the first point, Shifter is a necessary evil, and if TCG was going to hit him, the best I could see is semi-limited, but I just don't even see that happening. Regardless, I could be wrong about all of this, but I just wanted to share my opinion on this topic as it's gotten pretty big over the years. I hope you enjoyed this video, and have a good day, folks.